Hello, now we are going to talk about the function introspections. So, basically, in this session, we'll discuss more about how to get the attribute, how to get this argument of the function, how to get the documentation of the function, a lot more. But for that, we need to have a functions. So consider these functions we have, right? So we have this fact function. We take this n parameter, and here is some information about this argument, and here is this return type hinting, right? And here we have this written as a documentation of the function, and from here this function start. So these are the basics building block of the functions we have. This is a function of factorial which calculate the factorial of non-negative integer. Let's run this. Now, since function are also an object of a function class, so we can also add the attribute because this is an object now. So we have this function called fact. We can say that fact dot sort description. So this sort description will be the attribute of the function, and here we have the value of the attribute. Let's run this, and we can also print this sort description or any attribute value over here, right? We can get all the attribute that belong to this fact function using dir function, right? So let's call this dir function, and then let's see. So we have this lots of attribute. We have this annotations which will help you to get the annotations. We have this class which will help you to get the class of the function. We have this code which will give you the code of the function, right? So we have this lot of things over here. We have the name of the function, module of the functions, and here is the function, this attribute that we had described, right? So all these attributes will help you to know much deeper about the function, right? Now we'll see a lot more about these attributes, but first let's see. We have already discussed about the annotation and the doc. To get the documentation of the function, we just need to call doc attribute. Here we are getting the documentation of the function, and to get the annotation we can call the annotations. So here we'll get this annotations in the dictionary. So this is the first attribute we had, and this is the return annotations we had, right? So they again, like first attribute value, this annotation, and the return annotations, right? Now let's take a look at the different function. We have this myfunc. We have this one attribute a. Then we have this keyword, that is defined attribute. We have this, like we have the default value for these. Then we are using star, which can hold any number of attribute. Then again we have this keyword value. Again, keyword 2 has a parameter, like keyword 2 has a value, and then we are using double star keyword which will hold the, like which will hold any number of keyword, right? Let's define this, right? We can also assign any variable to this function, because whatever the function you are creating, that is an object, so you can define to any variable. Like over here we are defining to f is myfunc, so f will also behave like a myfunc, right? We can also get the name attribute. So here name attribute will hold the function name. So whenever I'm saying myfunc dot name, it will give you the name of the function. Let's call this f dot name. So f dot name will also be give you the name of the function, right? So again the same name. Now let's get the default attribute. So you'll get the default attribute in the tuple. So here we're getting myfunc.default. This will give you the default parameter value. Like over here we have this 2 and the 3, right? Because where 2 is repeating, right? So we are getting this value. So this will give you the default attribute. If you want to get the default keyword, for that we have to call this kw default, right? This will give you default keyword in the form of dictionary, right? Now let's create a function with some local variables. Here we have this function. In this function, I is 10 is the local variable, where rest all is the value we are having, right? So let's run this. Now here, to call this function, we need to give the defined, like we need to give the value for a, and here we are also changing the value for b, right, which is 100, right? Now, so this is the function we had with the local variables, right? Now the code attribute contains the code object we have. So again, if I'll say my func dot code, this will give you the code object. Remember, this is an object, right? So because this is an object, so there are different attributes we have, right? Because object has a certain class and that class had a lot of attributes. So you can get that attribute or you can get that code attribute using dir function again, right? Here we have this attribute value. All these are the attributes we had, right? We can see this co-var name. So this co-var name is an attribute for that code is a tuple containing parameter named and the local variables. So this co-var name will give you the local variable. For that we need to call this, we need to access code dot co-var names. This will give you the local variable. Here we can see that all the parameter name and also the local variable names we are getting. Right. Now we also have this attribute called co-arg count. This will return you the number of argument and it will exclude any number of optional argument, but any number of defined and the required argument it will give you, right? So let's see this. Here we have this total number of argument a and the b, right? And the count is 2, right? Now we also have the inspect module, which will help you to inspect these things, right? In a lot, like in a lot, in a lot good manner, right? So here we have this inspect modules, right? Let's import this inspect modules, and here we're calling inspect.each function, which will help to check whether this particular object belong to a function class or not. Let's call this. Of course, this is a function, so it is giving you true, right? And there is a difference between function and method, right? So method is a function that bound to some object. We know that. So let's call that whether that my function is object or is a method or not. When we'll check that, we'll get false. Now let's create one function, one class over here. Here we have created a class called my class. This is a function, this method we have created, and the argument we are passing self. So this is an instance method. Here we have created instance method, but now we have converted to a class method. So this is a class method now, and this is a static method now. So in Python, whenever you create object or whenever you create class, you will have three type of method. Instance method, that means called the object method, class method, and static method. Let's run this. And now let's use the inspect method to check about each of these methods. So this instance method are bound to the instance of the class, not the class itself, right? So whatever the method you have, that is directly accessible through instance. Class method are bound to the class, not the instance. And the static method has no bound for any class or the object, right? So here what we are trying to do is we are trying to access the f instance method via class, right? And again here we are also trying to call this f instance method via class. So, but here we are checking that whether this object, whatever the object we are getting, is a function or a method. Let's see. Again, remember, we are not calling this method via object, though this is an object method, but we are not calling this via object, but we are calling this via class. Let's see what happens when we call whether this my class.f instance is a function. It says true. So it says that my class.f instance behave like a function when you call via class, but when we call via method, like here we are checking that whether this f instance is a method of class or not, we are getting false, because we know that f instance is a method bound to the object, it is not bound to the class. So that's the reason we are getting false over here. And here it is behaving like a function. Again we are checking whether this my class dot f class, which is this, which is a class method, we are checking that whether this is a function or not. And here also we're checking that whether this is a method or not, right? Here we should get true over here because we know that we can access this f class via method. We cannot access this f class via class directly. Here we are accessing this f class via class directly. Now let's try to check with the static f static. In the f static, it says that it is a function, and for the method it says it is false. As we know that static method has no bound either to class or instance. So when you ask for the function whether it is a function or not, and it is not bound to the particular object, so it will give you true, right? But what we have to check, that we are trying to check directly whether this particular function or method is bound to the object or the class or not. So we are able to consider this directly over here, right? So here we are getting a correct answer, right? Now let's create a object of the class. Here we're saying my object equal to my class. This object we have created of my class, and now we can check based on the object. So again, the same thing will happen, right? For the object, this is a like method of object. Again, here we're checking whether this my object is a method belonging to F class or not. Here we are getting true because we know that even though that is a class object, right? But that class object is directly accessible to object, that we know, and for that reason we are getting true over here. Right here we are getting true in terms of function. For method we are not getting because static method is not bound to the either object or either class, right? Now if you want to know if something is a function or no, or a method, you just want to know whether this particular object is a function or method, we can use this function isRoutine. So isRoutine function will help you to check whether this particular object is a function or method. Here my func is the function, we know that, so we are getting true. Let's check for this method. We are getting true over here also, over here also, and over here also, right? So isRoutine function will help you to check whether it is function or method, right? We'll see OOPS concepts in more detail later on, right? Now let's understand about the callable code, right? We can also get back the source code using get source method. So in the inspect method only, we have this function called get source, and here we are trying to get the source of fact, which was the factorial. Here we are getting, this is the source code we are getting. Again, this is a string, so it is not printed in a nice format, but if you pass this object in a print function, you will get the exact source code. Here is the source code we have. So we have the source code of factorial functions. We can also get the source code of any method. Here you can get that, right? We can also find out where the function was defined. That means in which module that particular function is defined. For that we have to call the get modules. So we have this get module function which will help you to know which module this function belongs to. Here we can say that get module. Again, we are trying to get the module for the print function. This will give you the built-in modules because this is a part of the built-in modules. Let's import the math and let's try to check the sign function belonging to math to know which module it belongs to. We know that it belongs to the math module, but again, here we're checking that. We say that it belongs to math module and it's a built-in modules. Right. Now, let's try to learn about the comments. Here we have this variable. We are setting the variables. We are commenting the code. So this is the code we have. So this is this is the inside of the function comment, and this is the comment about the function. So if you want to know what is the comment of this particular function, you can use the get comments. Here we are getting this. So let's run this first. Here we have this comment line 1 and comment line 2. We are getting both the comment which is attached to my function, right? We can even apply the print function which will give you the nice format printing, right? Now we can also inspect the callable signature, right? So here we have this function. This function, this is an argument. This is the documentation, or like this is an annotation of the argument. We can check that with the default value, right? Now So this is a signature of the function. We can also call this a signature of the function. You can get the signature of the function using inspector.signature. We have this function called myfunc. We are getting the value. This is the signature value. Now consider that this is not the actual value we are getting, but this is getting a signature object. We can check the type. The type will give you the signature object, right? So here, what we're trying to do is because this is an object, so this belongs to some class. So what we're trying to do is we are just trying to get the attribute of this object, right? So here, let's call this. So here we have this lots of attribute belonging to this object, right? We have the parameter. So here what we're trying to do is we are trying to get the parameters, and then because because we know that this parameter value will be in the form of dictionary, so we are getting dot items, so the key in the value, and then we're trying to print all the parameter for this object being the signature object. Here we have this, right? Again, here what we have done is we have created a function print info, which is giving you a lot of information. Again, all the same thing we have applied. We have used the function name, length of the function name, get comment, clean code, sorry, clean documentations. We have this format, signature, name, default name, annotation kind, everything we are printing. So this print info function will help you to kind of print the most of the things about the function, right? Or the method. Let's call this and let's try to understand all this information for this my func. We're getting this. So this is the value we are getting, like the name of this is the name of the input, the default type, right? Here we have this keyword value or not, what are the annotation, right? So all these type of the value we are having, right? So we can do a lot more, but this is it. This is it for today, right? Thank you very much.